After a particularly harrowing time in the woods, Cal and Kayce return home to the tragic news that Garrett passed away while they were away. Apparently, his injuries from the fire were far too severe for him to overcome, resulting in his death. Andrea is distraught, especially since they just started dating, but the biggest impact of this loss will undoubtedly be on Kayce and Cal, as this means that there are only two musketeers left. The world of Yellowstone has always revolved around loyalty, survival, and family. But in Marshals, one tragic death may have done something nobody expected. It strengthened one of the sequel's most important relationships. Garrett's death wasn't simply another shocking moment designed to upset viewers. Instead, it became the emotional turning point that pushed Kayce and Cal closer together than ever before. In a franchise filled with betrayal, violence, and emotional scars, their growing bond suddenly feels like one of the few stable foundations left in the story. And honestly, that emotional connection may become the key to the future of Marshals. From the very beginning, Kayce has always been one of the most emotionally conflicted characters in the Yellowstone universe. Unlike many others around him, he constantly struggles between violence and peace, duty and freedom, loyalty and morality. That internal conflict made him unpredictable, but it also made him deeply human. Cal, on the other hand, entered Marshals with a very different energy, more controlled, more emotionally guarded, and often more practical in dangerous situations. Cal initially seemed like someone Kayce would clash with rather than trust. Their personalities didn't naturally fit together at first. But Garrett's death changes everything. The tragedy forces both men into emotional territory they can no longer avoid. Suddenly, the walls they build around themselves begin to crack. Instead of dealing with grief alone, they begin leaning on each other in ways neither expected. That's what makes their dynamic so compelling now. In many television dramas, loss destroys relationships. Characters become isolated, angry, and consumed by revenge. While some of that still exists in Marshals, Garrett's death surprisingly creates emotional honesty between Kayce and Cal instead of pushing them apart. For Kayce especially, the loss becomes deeply personal. Garrett represented more than just another figure in the ongoing conflict. His death becomes a reminder of how fragile life has become in this world and how quickly people can disappear. That emotional weight forces Kayce to reevaluate the people around him. And slowly, Cal becomes someone he can trust. The series handles this transition carefully instead of rushing it. Rather than instantly turning the two characters into perfect allies, Marshals allows the grief to naturally reshape their relationship through shared pain, difficult conversations, and dangerous situations. That realism is why the bond feels earned. One of the strongest parts of the storyline is how both characters cope with loss differently. Kayce carries grief emotionally. He internalizes guilt and constantly questions whether different choices could have changed the outcome. Cal processes pain more quietly, focusing on action and survival instead of emotional reflection. At first, those differences create tension, but eventually, they begin balancing each other out. Cal helps keep Kayce grounded when emotions threaten to overwhelm him, while Kayce slowly pulls Cal out of the emotional distance he normally hides behind. Their connection becomes less about survival and more about understanding. That emotional evolution is incredibly important for Marshals moving forward because the Yellowstone universe rarely allows characters to build genuine trust. Most relationships in the franchise are built on necessity, power, or fear. Kayce and Cal's bond feels different. It feels human. Garrett's death also changes the emotional tone of the sequel itself. Before this moment, Marshals often focused heavily on conflict and tension, but the aftermath of the tragedy introduces something more vulnerable into the story. For once, the show slows down long enough to explore grief and emotional dependence instead of only violence. That shift gives the series greater emotional depth. It also makes viewers more invested in Kayce and Cal as individuals rather than just characters caught in another dangerous mission. Audiences begin caring about whether they can emotionally survive what's happening around them, and that's powerful storytelling. Another reason this relationship matters is because Kayce desperately needs someone he can rely on. Throughout much of the Yellowstone franchise, he's often been emotionally isolated. Even when surrounded by family, Kayce frequently feels disconnected from the people closest to him. Cal changes that dynamic. Instead of forcing Kayce into another toxic cycle of manipulation or violence, Cal becomes someone who understands the emotional cost of the life they live. There's mutual respect between them, but more importantly, there's growing emotional honesty. That honesty becomes the emotional heart of Marshals after Garrett's death. The tragedy also reinforces one of the franchise's biggest themes. Pain either destroys people or brings them together. In this case, it does both. Some characters spiral deeper into anger and revenge after Garrett's death. Others become emotionally numb. But Kayce and Cal move in the opposite direction. They become stronger because they stop carrying the burden alone. That development may ultimately save both characters. And in a universe as brutal as Yellowstone, emotional connection can be just as important as physical survival. The chemistry between the two characters also gives Marshals something unique within the larger franchise. While Yellowstone stories often focus on power struggles and family warfare, Kayce and Cal bring emotional balance to the sequel. Their scenes feel quieter, more reflective, and more personal. That contrast helps Marshals stand apart from previous Yellowstone entries, while still maintaining the emotional intensity fans expect. Most importantly, Garrett's death proves that tragedy in this franchise can still serve meaningful character development instead of existing purely for shock value. The loss hurts. It changes the story permanently. But it also creates emotional growth that feels authentic and necessary.